I'm trying to figure out how I want to start this, and how far I want to go. Before I say anything else though, all of the warnings that I said in my last video still apply here, because we're going to be talking about everything. There is nothing about this specific topic that I'm going to avoid talking about. We're talking about two stereotypes today. The stereotype that all men are perverts, and that a man is always eager to have sex. In my last video, I said that these were the most destructive stereotypes aimed at men. And you have to keep in mind, I'm aware of all of the other stereotypes that are placed on men, like all abusers are men, the dumbass dad trope. I am fully aware of them. But this is the one that I decided to focus on. I truly believe that it is the most damning and the most damaging. You've heard it before. The one thing that any man wants is sex. He'll do anything for it. Men think about sex every 7 seconds. If he doesn't want sex at any given time, he's either gay, there's something wrong with him, or he's cheating on you. And a whole lot of other bullshit. And it really is bullshit. But let's talk about the reality of the situation. That might be a good place to start. According to the Kinsey Institute, only 54% of men think of sex every single day. That's slightly more than half. 43% only think about it once a week to once a month, and 4% thought of sex less than that. And I can go on and on about this, but we're short on time today. Studies in this modern day and age repeatedly keep suggesting that men and women have similar desires for sex, at least when it comes to how much sex that they want. But every person is different. A man can have a very low sex drive, and a woman can have a very high sex drive. And believe it or not, who is always eager is a stereotype that changes depending on where you are in time and where you are in the world. But let's talk about why this is prevalent now.
I wonder if he loves his mother. I wonder if he'll lose his hair. I wonder if he wants kids. I wonder if he's the one.
I want to sleep with her, 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 I want to sleep with her.
Every sitcom, every commercial, every stand-up comedian, hell, even dramas, they all go under the assumption that a man wants sex, and that's all that he wants. Coincidentally, they all seem to believe that women don't want sex. Ever. They just want to get pregnant. Like, they all dream of having a virginal birth. And as a corollary to that, men don't want children ever, they just want sex. I have come to despise the modern sitcom formula. Not because it's so detached from reality, but because it pretends to be close to reality. And because it pretends to be so close to reality, way too many people think that these things that you see in your typical sitcom or commercial have any basis in fact. We usually call this the CSI effect, when people take media perceptions and apply them to reality, because they cause this all the fucking time. How many shows have you seen where they claim a guy is guilty because he failed a polygraph test? A lot of people believe that the polygraph test is infallible, to the point where it can be legally used by several states to determine if you're lying. In reality, a polygraph saying that you're lying is about as accurate as saying that you lied because you've gotten a cold sore. It's just as scientific. The CSI effect, despite its name, doesn't just affect crime shows. In any given story dealing with schizophrenia, the character will always be seeing visual hallucinations. People with Tourette's only have the swearing tick. Abuse in television shows is always physical and always male on female. And men always and only think about sex, while women never ever do. Before I go further, if a man does continually think of sex to the exclusion of everything else, to the point where he's having trouble concentrating on other things in his life, that is actually more realistically the mental illness, and that probably requires therapy. Oh, by the way, before we do continue, there's one failing that I neglected to mention in the actual episode. Even if that story was written perfectly, they still screwed up. It's not as bad, but Peter-Assment made one glaring mistake. They constantly kept mentioning that Angela was ugly. Quagmire was quote-unquote allowed to refuse to have sex with her because she was ugly. If the story was set up perfectly, it would still end up saying that the only reason that a man could possibly refuse sexual advances from a woman is if it was because she was ugly, and that's with its own batch of unfortunate implications. A man can have all the reasons for refusing to have sex that a woman does. He's in a relationship, he doesn't like you, he has a headache, he's not in the mood right now, or it's none of your fucking business, just leave him alone. Even though men are men and women are women, people are people, and individual people have individual needs towards sex. Some individual people want a lot of sex, some individual people want little amounts of sex, and some of them don't want to have sex at all. Their biological sex has very little to do with this, as studies keep repeatedly showing. But enough of the statistics. I want to dedicate most of this video to the actual implications and the reasons why this is the worst stereotype placed on men. This video is going to get very heavy because people not believing that a man can be sexually harassed is the least of the problems that a man can face as a result of this stereotype. So you walk into an office and you see your husband's secretary kissing him. The first reaction of everyone ever is that he's cheating on you because it's entirely impossible that she sexually assaulted him. I mentioned this in the review, but only briefly. The most realistic reaction to a man getting sexually harassed or held hell, even raped, is not to say that he was provoking it, but to say that he was initiating it. And yes, it gets worse. What I'm going to talk to you about today is truly disgusting. Because while the standard is bad enough when we apply it to adults, it gets much, much worse when you have an adult and a child or a teenager. People already love to point out the double standard. If a young boy has been molested by an older female who's not ugly, people tend to see him as lucky instead of hurt. Or if they do see him as hurt, they would see him as less hurt than his female equivalent. The reason for that, if it goes beyond our society's screwed up understandings of sex, is that women get pregnant. The problem with thinking that a male would be less affected by being raped because a woman gets pregnant is the tiny little fact that women get pregnant. If a man or a boy has been raped by a woman, she has the possibility of getting pregnant and bringing the child to term, and there's absolutely nothing that the boy or man can do about this. If she so chooses, this means that the victim is forced to pay his rapist for 18 to 21 years, depending on the jurisdiction. The courts here in the United States have forced boys younger than 16 of age to pay child support to their abusers. Let me tell you why we have the age of consent here in the United States and most of the civilized world. It is because we, as a society, have collectively decided that some people are not yet mature enough to understand all of the implications of sex. Even if they're biologically capable of it, they may not be emotionally capable or aware of the consequences of their action. And this is to prevent them from being taken advantage of by a person who is old enough to be aware of the consequences and just doesn't give a shit. It is clear to me, according to our laws, that protection by the age of consent only applies to females. Because according to our society, a man understands all of the implications of sex at birth. Under the law, a man is required to pay child support for any child that he helped or was forced to help conceive, even if the conception was due to a criminal action on the part of a woman. This is because society believes that all men, even as young as 13, are all boner-driven animals. If you didn't want to pay, you should have kept your pants on. Oh what? She tied you down? Force-fed you Viagra? You don't want to pay her? You're a alleged rapist? You're just going to be another deadbeat, and society will hate you. For those not aware, let me tell you the consequences of not paying child support here in the United States. First of all, they can garnish your wages. This can make you fail to pay your rent and make you homeless. This has the prospect of making you less employable, making it harder for you to pay back the child support. You can be fined and jailed. This has the prospect of making you less employable, making it harder for you to pay back the child support. You can have both your driver's license and your passport revoked, making it difficult to get to your place of work. This has the prospect of making you less employable and making it harder for you to pay back the child support. Would you do this to any other victim of rape? And not to mention, there is very little oversight to what any woman does with child support she gets. Most women who are getting child support, I'm sure, spend it in whatever ways they can on their child. However, any woman willing to rape someone and then bring a child to term out of this doesn't sound like the kind of person who would do that. Then there's that next stereotype that goes often hand in hand with this. Because our society thinks that men continually want sex, they aren't affected psychologically or physically by rape. Would you say that to a promiscuous woman who was raped, that because she always wants sex, she wouldn't be affected by rape? If you would, then you're a fucking asshole. Get out of here. It does not matter how much you say yes to sex. It never revokes your right to say no. Men go through the same emotional roller coaster that women tend to go through after being raped. There are feelings of loss of control, anxiety, sometimes trust issues, depression, and even post-traumatic stress disorder. Not helping is the fact that because this horrible thing happens to you, everyone thinks that you're lucky. Because you don't feel lucky about this, you may even begin to question your sexual orientation. That's a lot to worry about, even without worrying that your rapist might get pregnant. A lot of people don't believe that men can get raped, physically. And in the realm of statutory, they don't seem to care. You know, unless the boy got raped by a man. In fact, until recently, legally only a female could be raped. It took us to this fucking decade to change the definition to include male victims. And still, it specifically seems to ignore female on male sexual assaults, which does happen. A boy being raped by a man is the only time that a guy getting raped seems to be a tragedy to our society. The rest of the time, it's comedy, especially if they've been raped by a man. Yeah, how many times have you heard a don't drop the soap joke? Men always want sex, so let's give those criminal assholes exactly what they want. Wink wink, nudge nudge. Yeah, nobody deserves to get raped, asshole. But do you know the number one reason that people are in prison in the United States? Minor drug offenses. Also, the number of prison rapes are staggering. Like, men get raped more in prison than women do outside of it. Over 200,000 prisoners are sexually assaulted in prison each year, when compared to 90,000 people outside of prison. And it's not only the prisoners doing it to each other. Sometimes, about half the times, it's the guards. This is not justice. This is definitely not comedy. This is disgusting. And also, apparently, it's a really good way to spread around HIV. Yeah, isn't that great logic? The most common ways to get HIV is through filthy needles and unprotected sex. So let's put all the drug users in jail and turn our backs while they get raped. This may be one of the reasons why HIV is so prevalent in the United States. I'd like to say that that was the most depressing fact we'll be talking about today, but the deaths of children kind of take the cake. You see, people are avoiding helping out children because they don't want to be seen as pedophiles. And when I say avoiding helping out, I mean avoiding saving their lives. As a corollary to men always wanting sex, it's thought that everything they do is motivated by sex. And considering that a man would do anything for sex, except have anything to do with any child created from it, it leads to people making assumptions. I could talk about men being fearful to become teachers or daycare supervisors, which all come with their own legitimate problems. But I thought, in interest of time, I'd talk about the actual deaths caused by this hysteria. There have been surveys and social experiments, and even real examples, that show if a kid is lost in the mall or on the side of the road or being carried away while loudly shouting, your average person would do nothing. 2 little girls pretended to be lost in a mall. Only one person decided to help her out, an elderly woman, out of over 600. In some cases, men have been accused of being pedophiles for saving children's lives. And some children have died because everyone who could have helped was too afraid to be called pedophile. God help you if you're a man with a child who took after their mother or you've decided to adopt. By the way, as with almost any crime, you're more likely to be victimized by someone you know. Statistically, your relatives are more likely to molest your children than a random stranger. But for interest in butchering stupid statistics, how likely is it that a random man will kidnap your child off the streets? In 1999, 115 children were kidnapped. This is out of 72 million minors in the United States. You hear big statistics all the time, 800,000, but they're always conflating in things like willing runaways, false reports, and doing everything else I talked about in the Screams of Silence video. Maybe this would be worth it if we were actually preventing something, but instead it's causing many other problems. People are now less likely to help children, making them even more vulnerable. No matter what, as a parent, you will not be able to watch your children 24/7, and you cannot protect them from everything. It's not realistic. But if that's not enough, there's a healthy dose of irony here. You want to know what kills kids more than stranger danger? Drowning, coincidentally enough. There are a lot of statistics that are misused to bring up paranoia and hysteria because the media is filled with bullshit. Your child's chances of being abducted in the United States are 1 in 750,000. There's a greater chance of them being struck by lightning. This is what happens when we base our efforts on assumptions. People die because of our paranoia. We have to think rationally as a society. Every aspect about this stupid myth is destructive on every level. While men being treated like idiots in sitcoms annoys me, the things that I've discussed today are some of the worst aspects of our society. I could spend a whole 15-minute video on each of them, and the other aspects that I didn't even get around to talking about. What, did you think the only problem that men faced when it came to this was virgin shaming? As you might have noticed, the problems go in way deeper than that. I don't even know how much of a problem virgin shaming really is. I mean, I'm so virginal I could breed unicorns, and I've never gotten flack by it for anyone except stupid internet trolls who only make assumptions. But the problems that I mentioned today, I have seen them all the time. I've been seeing prison rape jokes since I was a kid. Hell, the Powerpuff Girls even had prison rape jokes. That show was rated Y7. And hell, shows are still making these kind of jokes 20 years later. A man getting tied down on his bed and being raped by a woman, that's not a crime, that's a comedy act. And if she was his teacher, well, that's an Adam Sandler movie, where it leads to all kinds of wacky hijinks. Fucking God, this society. What I want is a society that treats people like people. People that are not statistics. People that are not over the top or as dramatized as your media would have you believe. And we're never going to have a society where we treat people like people until we can realize that people are not statistics. They are not over the top, and they are not dramatized.